For the longest time, history has shown the oppression of those of minority groups, all groups being discriminated against in similar ways, whether it was through slavery, work for little pay, or being denied everyday rights. Those who faced discrimination eventually would take a stand against those who denied them their humanity. Discrimination and oppression are not old news. They are things that take place even nowadays, and that's a hard thing to get your head wrapped around. Most recently with the Mexican American or Chicano struggle, beginning with the farm workers who came from Mexico and worked under hard conditions with little pay. Cesar Chavez led the farm workers' revolution. But what about the Latino education struggle? What was the Chicano struggle with education, and how did a group of high school students change not only their educational future, but the future of other students? The East LA Walkouts demonstrated the power of education and the human spirit. They fought for their rights, and they had the ability to stand up to their oppressors for what they believed in. The term Chicano originally was a derogatory term used towards Mexicans who had come from Mexico to the United States or those of Mexican descent. Soon it became a movement called El Movimiento. This movement wanted to unite those proud of their Mexican heritage who were being oppressed because of it. Starting with Cesar Chavez, who led the Farm Workers' Revolution, which was one of the most well-known Chicano revolutionists to date. Also the group called the Brown Berets, who fought for Mexican-American civil rights and are still active to date. Revolutionaries like these are what inspired the activists and the 1968 walkouts in East LA themselves. The walkouts were caused by many factors, from flaws in the school system to just straight racism.
I know that the East LA walkouts were for the students that were not, for the Chicano students that were having difficulty trying to break barriers into trying to reach higher education, and that was due to the hostile environment that the teachers were creating and the inability of the district to meet the needs of the Chicano students.
The film Walkout clearly depicts the educational and racial struggle Chicanos faced in the 1960s in Los Angeles. East Los Angeles was and still is heavily populated with Latino students, especially those of Mexican descent. These students went through plenty of mistreatments. One of the bigger classroom rules in East Los Angeles schools included no Spanish speaking. If students spoke Spanish, they were to be punished, usually by getting hit with a paddle in front of their peers. The education in East LA was not successful as it was, and that angered students. The fact that they were not being taught the way they should be. Aside from that, Mexican-American history was not taught at all in schools. There were few Latino, Chicano, or Raza staff, and the schools were simply inferior. Sal Castro, a Chicano educator and activist, one of few, had inspired his students at Lincoln High School to take pride in their heritage and to take charge of their rights as Chicanos and as students. Paula Cristomo was one of the many students who was inspired by Castro and actually did take a stand. She, along with activists including Moctezuma Esparza, the Brown Berets, and many other Chicano activists, decided to make change happen and started to plan school walkouts. They wanted to protest against the mistreatment they received and even had demands that they planned to present to the school board. Included in this list of demands were things such as having a more Latino-based staff and giving students the opportunity to learn about their Mexican-American history in a classroom setting. On March 1st, 1968, the first walkout occurred. It started off with students such as Cristomo shouting out, "Walkout," followed by students leaving class and flooding the streets of East LA, holding up signs and shouting, "Chicano power and viva la raza." Police were contacted because people didn't know how to react and didn't want any problems to break out. Police assaulted students and the protest turned into a kind of riot. Students were trying to physically fight back against police and were resisting arrest. This did not stop the activists. The walkouts continued for the rest of the week, even when the school gates were chained up and kept them from leaving campus, or when police raided schools and beat students. They still managed to get out on the street and protest. This got the school board's attention. Police discovered who 13 of the organizers were and arrested them. Among them were Moctezuma Esparza and Sal Castro. They were known as the East LA 13. This led activists and a large part of the community to protest against the arrests, with the support of the Black Panthers, Cesar Chavez, and Senator Robert Kennedy. Eventually, 12 of the 13 were released. Sal Castro was not released on bail until June 2nd. He was fired from his job teaching at Lincoln High School. This just led to more protests. Activists had sit-ins at the board office for 8 days. They were also arrested, but Sal Castro was given his job back the next day.
I believe that the walkouts were crucial not only to the changes that became of the walkouts during that time, but it was also a history that was able to be repeated in terms of the tactics to draw attention to the needs of Chicanos. An example of that was some of the walkouts that happened on May 1st, which continuously, I believe that the first one was in 2007, 2008, which later on continued to be the same walkouts in a way to speak out for the needs of the Chicano students.
The East LA walkouts still influence today's activists and Chicano Latino youth. Groups such as the Brown Berets and Mecha are still very active fighting for the Chicano youth when it comes to discrimination and education.
After the walkouts, students needed to organize themselves. They needed to be able to go to a safe place, and that safe place was meeting with other Chicanos and knowing and creating a network, not only at a state level, but in the whole nation, to where if Chicano students were going to be moving for any reason, either for school or family matters to other states, they were able to go back to that network. The Chicano movement and Mecha were vital to my education throughout my high school years, because it was my resource to make it through high school, coming from a background of family members who were farm workers, and I myself was a farm worker at the time too. And it was the group that I would reach out to be able to overcome obstacles of not knowing the language at a time, of also becoming the obstacle of having absent parents because they were working in the agricultural backgrounds. And the movement was also important for me because not only was I benefiting from the changes that had already occurred, but it also encouraged me to make further changes for those whose needs had not been met, such as
Chicano youth recognized the negative and unfair treatment they were receiving and decided to fight against it. They took a stand against those who doubted them and were not giving them equal opportunity. They took a stand against inequality, their oppressors, and discrimination.